All right, so right now we're above the post office. And what we did here, the engineering department did here, this is level 3. We went, this entire project and within the Motorgate Garage, we've had a couple of years of waterproofing the entire structure. But on this particular floor, which is right above the post office, they had significant water infiltration. So what we did here, what we did is scarify probably 1/8 of an inch of the concrete and waterproofed it. And the process is basically shot blasting the concrete, and it cleans it up, and it scrapes it off, and then once we had a nice clean layer of concrete, we were able to pour this epoxy sealant, which is 3 layers of sealant, above here to protect the surface, and the intention is to make sure that we have a waterproof surface, that we won't have the tenants below us, Gristedes and the post office, suffer water infiltration into their spaces. This is what I hope will be a model for the rest of the garage. While we had this nice clean surface, a significant issue came up with the residents in terms of the striping. So once we had a nice clean surface, we decided to restripe this whole area. Again, while we had scraped off a layer of the concrete, we also scraped off the previous layers of spaces and striping that we had here. And then one of the hot topics of hot concerns that residents had is that they didn't know exactly which lanes to park, because they had conflicting lines. So lines were painted over, lines were faded out, lines were crisscrossing each other, so it was very confusing, and I understood that completely. So while we had a clean surface, we had another contractor come in to do the striping of the spaces. Now, which is what you see here, these yellow stripes. One of the things that we found out when we were taking measurements of the existing spaces is that the spaces were not uniform in the garage. We had spaces that were either angled or that they were straight in terms of the parking stalls. And not only that, the width of the space varied throughout the garage. Some spaces were 7'6", some were 7'9", some were 8 feet, some were 8'3" in width, which also caused some of the confusions in terms of parked cars coming in and not having enough space. So one of the things that we decided to do was make it uniform. So what you see here are stalls that are 8 feet 6 inches in width. And we also, in this particular floor, decided to have the stalls or the parking spaces straight. We can do a walkthrough of some of the other spaces where you see the angled parking. Our intention is to make those spaces straight as well. And we thought about that for quite a bit. It's more advantageous to have the straight spaces, because when you have an angled space, you actually take more space because it's angled, and you take, let's say, a space in a quarter, it goes into another area. So in discussing it with the contractor, say if you have a straight space, you can be within 8 feet 6 inches. But if you angle and keep that same width, then you're going to need about 9 feet or 10 feet of space. So by keeping the stall straight and making them a little wider, we actually created more parking spaces. We gained a couple of more parking spaces. But at the same time too, where by making it wider, we shifted a parking space. So in the stall, like over here in particular, these set of stalls, we had 6 spaces here, 6 parking spaces. Right now, with the expansion of the parking spaces, we have 5. So we had to shift 1 car over.
This one looks a little bit bigger.
It's a little bit bigger because, and it's a little bit bigger over there because, it would have just been dead space. So we gave the guy a little bit more space. So he gained a little bit more space. So a big SUV can fit in here, or a big truck can fit in here without a problem.
Are these reserved spaces for particular vehicles or particular?
They're reserved. I don't know what vehicles are parked here. The same person who parks here will be parking here again. they've been parking while we've been doing this particular project someplace else in the garage, but they'll be coming back to the space. What central parking likes to do is assign the space to an appropriate vehicle. But then you just never know if someone down the road, 5 years down the road,
Right. Like a
gets a
SUV,
smaller-
should use that space.
Exactly.
Right.
But when the applicant comes in and asks for a reserved spot, they take that into consideration to make sure that the car is appropriate for the space. But in making it uniform, this is an exception here, but in making it uniform, we had to shift as parking. He's still in the same general area, but then we shifted the car over, and then we opened up all those spaces as
Right.
well. So just one car just shifted over, but you're still in the same general area. This again is what I hope will be a uniform pattern, the treatment to the floor that will waterproof the entire structure, as well as have uniform spaces for each of the stalls throughout the entire building. I think the capacity of the entire structure is 1,522 spaces. And I don't know what we'll be able to gain. The engineering department is working on that now in terms of what we'll gain once we make it straight spaces. The other thing that we did here is develop these crosshatch so that in other spaces you'll see when we have the angled parking, you see some, especially on the floor above us, and we can take a look at that in a few minutes. The crosshatch, there's a parking space that comes right here. So what happens is when a vehicle is coming by and the car is sticking out, it cuts into the lane. So we want to make sure safety first. So we want to make sure that the car is in enough that it's not going to interfere with the car coming by and probably rear-ending it if the car's sticking out. So we want to make sure the car's protected, that's parked here, and that people are following the pattern of the road here.
Could you use these spaces for motorcycle parks?
Well, that's a good question, but before I go there, let me just show you the difference between the surface when we went through the process of shot blasting the floor. This is a remnant of it. The epoxy didn't come this far, but you can see how the difference. This is basically the before, the shot blasting,
Right.
and cleaning the oils and the grease that accumulated over the years. And this is over a couple of weeks old already, but you can see the difference.
Good.
And then the epoxy is on here. And this epoxy has a warranty, and it should, again, protect the structure and also the tenants underneath. And we'll hope to do that above on the other floors as well. Now, in terms of your question for motorcycle parking, from what I understand from central parking, there's a demand for increased spaces for motorcycles. So we were able to, this space could be designated for a couple of bikes, a couple of motorcycles, and without any interference. When we do the next phase of the camera project, when we have cameras in Motorgate, we can have cameras looking in this particular area to make sure that no one's vandalizing any of the motorcycles. But this can be an area designated for motorcycles.
Do you have any idea how many motorcycles could be in that space?
I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. You know, as long as they don't hog up too much of the space and they are considerate of others, they can just parallel park to each other. So, but that's basically it. And I think this is a good example of what can happen here at Motorgate. And once we have the improved lighting, once we clean up the structure, the other thing that I want to be able to do here is you'll see the sequence of the numbers are not in sequence.
That's right.
So once we do all of this, I want to renumber each of the stalls to a number that's in sequence that corresponds to the floor. And if I have an issue, or Central Parking has an issue with space 31 and 54, they know exactly where to go to, as opposed to not knowing where to go to now. So it's a process.
Sure.
But in the short term, I think we resolve, and we'll find out how this plays out, but the concerns from residents about the parking spaces and people overlapping spaces and not having enough space or not enough parking can be resolved by what we did here.
When do you anticipate this level being open?
Monday.
It'll be open on Monday.
Monday.
And are there now current plans to do the same thing on other? Is there a date for the other floors to be worked on?
Well, we had extra funds that remain from the entire project. So we have to analyze what would be the financial impact to do the rest of the structure, because we don't have funds to cover the entire structure. Since we had surplus funds from the entire waterproofing job and concrete repair that we did to the building, we decided to apply here and then use this as a template for the entire building.
And how long did it take to do this area, approximately?
This took about a week, and then the painting took about a day. You need, again, you need to, it's a whole process of, I mean, it's essentially you're scraping the concrete, like a very thin layer of concrete, cleaning it up, scraping it, removing everything there, and then removing all the dust and so on, because the epoxy won't be able to adhere to something that if it is dirty. So cleaning that up properly, then applying epoxy, and then having 3 layers of it and letting it cure, and then you have a sealed surface. Now, the other thing too, you see, the only thing that we have here, and you'll see this in other places throughout the city, is that we have painted lines as opposed to the acrylic striping that you may see on asphalt. And the reason why we have painted lines is because the acrylic doesn't adhere to concrete surfaces. That's why we also, like on Main Street, we have it on asphalt, we have the acrylic striping or stenciling. But on the Z-brick, we have painted lines. So the only disadvantage is that it becomes a maintenance item, and so every year or every 2 years, we have to refresh in the lines. But now that we have the pattern, we just quickly clean it up, and that's the other advantage of having this epoxy. It's a surface that is easily maintained, so you can hose it down, you can power wash it without any problem. It's easy to clean. As opposed to the concrete that will absorb whatever residue or dirt into the porous nature of the concrete.
So just I see these chalk marks over here.
Yeah, that will come
That
off.
will just easily come off.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent.
Exactly. So,
Good job.
yeah, no problem. But I'll show you. So here's a perfect example of the problem that currently exists throughout the rest of the garage, where we have a parking space for a small vehicle. We have one-way traffic coming this way, but yet the car can technically park here. So if I'm parked here and my trunk is sticking out, I'm a vehicle driving by, there's a potential hazard or potential conflict between my car and the car that's here, especially if I don't do a wide left turn. So this is the problem that I want to eliminate. You see the crosshatch, which is created, but then you also have lines of the parking space on top of the crosshatch. So technically, if this is my assigned parking spot, I can park here. And this is what I don't want to happen. So the ideal situation would be to expand the crosshatch to about here, so that way it forces the driver, if it's a good driver, to make a wide left turn, avoiding anything here. But at the same time too, I want to be able to not have angled parking, but have straight parking. So that way I don't have that conflict over here. I may lose a spot, but then I just shift it down.
I see that example. It's a great example of the problems and the dangers that exist
Great.
for the renovation that you're attempting.
Another example of a condition, a hazardous condition that exists within the garage that we're trying to correct with the work that we're doing. We have a parking space with and then a crosshatch within a parking space, and then it's a reserved spot. So if a car's parked here,
Watch out for the car.
parked here, and I'm driving, it's one-way traffic. Depending on the size of the car, again, you can have potential of conflict here between the two vehicles, especially if the vehicle is driving fast, is coming out, wanting to exit, or if the vehicle makes a sharp left turn. Again, I want to eliminate these conditions here. What the ideal situation would be, there's plenty of space here. And this is probably, 20 feet in width. There's plenty of space here. There's no reason for this crosshatch to exist within a parking space. I don't know what preceded what, but this crosshatch should be out here. So that way, if I'm coming down this road, this parking lot, and the crosshatch comes out to here, I have all the space, too. But I can still have a parking space there, but I don't have a conflict. And then again, make it straight so I can maximize the number of spaces that I can have within an aisle.